What did one snowman say to the other? Can you smell carrots? All right, welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope you're having a great 2026 so far. That joke that I started off with, these came from these Christmas gifts that my brother had sent to my family, my kids. He now moved to Newcastle in northern England, and so I guess this is a tradition they have there. They have these tubes, and you pull the tube. You stand like two people. You pull it apart, and then it pops. And when it pops, three things come out. One, you get one of these. I assume it's like those Burger King crowns that we have in America. Got three different colors of these in the three different ones. And then you get like a fun card with it has a joke on it. It has like a charade, a trivia, just stuff like that. Things people did before they had phones. And finally, you get like one gift item with each one. So the first one that we opened, this is what fell out. I think it's a bottle opener, as far as I can tell. I guess they start them off young over there. And the second thing we got was a clip. Any child would be thrilled to get this. And the final item was this. I thought it was just a spring keychain at first, but then there was a little piece of paper that explained this is a magic trick. You're supposed to get the ring off of the spring, and so people will do that. But the trick it explained is just because no one would think of this is just to go like that, keep twisting it until it comes off the end. And so that's what they do in England, in Newcastle. And this is British humor, obviously. So if you don't understand it, I'll help explain it to you. So the second joke we got is, what music do elves like best? And it's rap music, but not with an R, with a W, like W-R-A-P. Because if you don't know, elves, they're Santa's helpers, and they live in the North Pole, and they give people presents. So yeah, I know rap music has become kind of universal around the world. But the joke here is the rapping. They're not talking about the music. They're talking about the gifts, like wrapping paper. See? Yeah, that one's tricky. And then the final joke. This one. Okay. Who delivers presents to cats at Christmas? Santa Paws. Like P-A-W-S. Yeah, this one, I would think you could just go with Santa Claus. Like the rap music, how they changed the R-A-P to W-R-A-P. It could have just been Santa Claus, C-L-A-W-S, because cats do have claws. And so they could have gone with that, that spelling trick. But they went with Santa Paws instead. For some reason, when I think of cats, I don't really think of paws, I know they have paws, but paws feel more like a dog to me. Anyway, that's what they do in England, and that's what kids get for Christmas. I'm not sure if it's just a Newcastle thing or if it's across the whole country. But thank you to Uncle Jesse for those presents. Okay, and today I'm going to move on to book reviews. So this is probably like my least favorite thing to actually do on this channel. I think I'm pretty bad at it, but I did wear glasses today, so hopefully I'll look a little bit more intelligent as I'm talking. I got some books to talk about, obviously. So the first one is Shogun, which is it's a pretty big book, actually. This took up the majority of my fiction reading time this month, and it was good. I really like this book a lot. It's historical fiction set in 1600 in Japan. And James Clavell, before he wrote novels, this is not his first novel, but before he wrote novels, he was a screenwriter, and that definitely comes across. Like when I read this book, I was like, I can see why they made it. I think originally it was a series, maybe back in the 70s or 80s. And then I know I'm not sure when the original series was actually, but I know it recently, I think, was made into possibly a movie or a series. And you can see why. It's just every chapter feels like it could be an episode to a series. And so it's a very engaging book. His writing style is very engaging. I would say it's descriptive. It's not like overly poetic or anything like that. It's fairly descriptive, but a lot is happening in the plot. Like the plot is always moving forward. And so in this book, basically, like at this point in Japan, there's a little bit of a power vacuum, I would say. And so there's always the emperor, but the emperor's kind of behind the door. You don't see what he's doing, and so there's someone ahead of him or in front of him that's the effective leader of Japan, the person that's doing all the work. And the highest position that could be is the shogun. I always want to say shogun, but I did make a point of being shogun. So, and that person, it's basically like the highest samurai, is the person who will lead the country. And so there was someone who was very successful in the late 1500s, but he passed away, and he did have an heir, but the heir is only like 6 or 8 years old or something like that. So they're basically, he wanted to make sure his son could still take over, but he needed to make sure no one took over before his son. So he set up like a council of regents where there's basically 6 different leaders that he knew had differing enough opinions and values from different regions, different religions even. Some of them are Christian, some are Shinto, some are Buddhist. And so he knew they wouldn't be able to get along well enough for one of them to take power. They would basically effectively all struggle against each other. So that would buy enough time for the proper heir to take over. And so one of those regents, though, was actually close to the guy who passed away, whose name I can't remember. But the guy who the story kind of focuses on is named Toranaga in the story. And he is a real historical figure, but James Clavell changed the Japanese names, and he also changed the name of the British character in this, but he changed the names to be kind of simpler for the American or English tongue to pronounce. And this is it's not like what we would now call I guess hard historical fiction. It's more soft historical fiction. So it's about real events that took place, but of course he had a lot of license with what he did with that. And so this guy Toranaga, he is the book's, in a way, it's focused on him, and he's constantly kind of scheming and planning and just making sure that he doesn't fall out of power, because there's a lot of forces coming against him. And I like this character a lot. He, given the kind of constraints of his situation, I feel he's about as good as he could have been, and he's very inquisitive. He always wants to learn new things. I feel like he was as merciful as he probably could be in his situation. He's just a pretty cool character. But before we get to him, there's John Blackmore. He's an English sea captain, and so he's leading. He's the pilot of a ship, a Dutch ship, that is the first to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar and make it all the way to Japan. So previous to that, the Portuguese and the Spanish had made it there. And the Portuguese were very important in the trade between Japan and China, because Japan needed to get silk from China. But since the two countries had previously been at war, they just couldn't peacefully do that trade. So the Portuguese were basically the middlemen who also made a lot of money off of that trade. And the Jesuits were kind of they were sent from Portugal. And so they were evangelizing in Japan. And then there's the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Jesuits were very involved with kind of in getting their hands into Japanese politics, even though they said that they weren't. And they also were much more successful than the Spanish and the Franciscans, who I'll talk about in a minute. The Jesuits, they learned the Japanese language very well, and they learned the culture, so they knew how to work within the Japanese culture. They changed their dress as well, so they weren't always wearing like the black robes and whatnot. I think they kind of copied more Buddhist style robes, if I understood correctly, like kind of the orange or saffron robes you see all over Asia. And so, they attempted to fit in to the culture, and they were very involved in the trade as well with the Chinese. And then there were the Spanish Franciscans, who are lightly kind of represented in this book. So it mostly focuses around the Portuguese, who are the Jesuits, who are much more successful in Japan. But the Franciscans had a completely different kind of attitude. They're not as organized as the Jesuits, and so the Franciscans are just more kind of, I would say, passionate, and their goal is to save souls, and they're just doing it in the most direct way possible. So they weren't concerned about the culture and whatnot, and so they weren't nearly as successful as the Jesuits were. So basically, Blackthorn is shipwrecked in Japan. So they make it to Japan in the beginning. The beginning kind of focuses on his trip, and things are going very badly. Like, they started off with 5 ships, and 4 of them were destroyed early on in the way, and there's just 1 left, and many people have starved to death. They're all getting scurvy. They're doing very bad, and but Blackthorn's just pushing because he wants to get to Japan, and so he's the one that kind of encouraged and forced everyone more or less to go to Japan. So they're shipwrecked. They land in a Japanese village, and at first they're kind of taken care of, but very quickly they're put into a pit in the ground. And that part, like, I'm kind of claustrophobic, and that part was kind of hard for me to imagine. But there's basically, like, the Japanese had a pit in the ground where they stored like fresh fish after they caught them, I guess. And so they were just stuck down there, and they're also like pouring some like fermented fish down there and stuff to make it more difficult for them. But anyway, eventually, I don't want to spoil too much, but Blackthorn, this is early in the book, Blackthorn, he starts moving up in the culture because he becomes, basically he helps Toranaga. Toranaga realizes that he has much to gain through Blackthorn, and Blackthorn realizes the same thing. And so Blackthorn becomes more and more fluent in the culture and the language. It takes him a while. He makes a lot of mistakes. He's kind of he's very strong-minded, and so many things that the Japanese do really bother him. For example, at this time, samurai had a lot of power in Japan and a lot of rights over your normal like peasant population. So basically, like, peasants could have land, but everything that they produced, samurais could take what they wanted. So they could heavily tax the peasant populations. Samurais were also basically allowed to kill anyone they wanted to if you weren't a fellow samurai. And so Blackthorn disagrees with their treatment of the peasant population, and just different things like that. He's constantly getting upset and angry. And of course, in Japanese culture, kind of like here in Thailand, it's the same way. Actually, it's kind of very, more so in Japan, I think, but it's very, it's looked down upon for sure to get angry in public. You're supposed to control your emotions, and so many of the Japanese at first are kind of like having a hard time with Blackthorn, but he continues to learn and get better. And one of the reasons for that is that Toranaga assigns an interpreter or translator for him. I think her name was Mariko, maybe Mariko. I'm not sure, but she's an interesting character. Like, her husband is an important samurai kind of military leader, but they don't have a good relationship. And her father had been disgraced. And so in the Japanese culture, of course, honor at this time, serving whoever your master was, those are all very, very important things. And so shame, generally to be shamed, was one of the worst things that could happen. And so a lot of times, like a samurai they honor death a lot as well. So they don't want to have like a shameful death. So, they want to be able to commit the ritualistic, I don't forget what it's called, like seppuku or something like that, where they, with the sword. And sometimes they're not allowed to, if they're, if they're dishonorable, they might be forced to take their own life in a different fashion, or just be killed. And even to be killed in battle, you wanted to be able to take your own life at the last second, basically. And then, you'd do that, and you'd have a second with you who would chop off your head with the sword. So because you didn't want to like scream in pain or something, because that was considered dishonorable as well. So the culture is very much, the samurai culture is focused on having an honorable death. And so there's so many things that are at ends with kind of Christian culture. And Mariko, I'll just call her, she's actually Christian. And so that was interesting to kind of see how they balance those things, because she's also a samurai. Women could be samurai. They did do things a little bit differently. They had when they had to end their life, they used a small knife to slit their own throat, or just stab themselves in the throat or something like that. Sorry to be so graphic. And so anyway, she's Catholic, of course. Since it's Jesuits and Franciscans, everyone in Japan is Catholic. And that's another thing with Blackthorn. The English and the Dutch, of course, were Protestant. And so they hate the Portuguese, they hate the Spanish. And even the Portuguese and the Spanish are also kind of at ends a bit at this time, because of, well, I don't know that much about the history, but I believe at that time Portugal had a Spanish king, and so they're at ends. And then, of course, the English hate both of them, the Dutch as well. And the Franciscans are kind of at ends with the Jesuits as well. So I don't know, everyone's got a thing. But with Mariko, since she is Christian but samurai, it's kind of weird, because she swears to Toranaga that like he's, serving him is the highest thing in her life. She's gonna serve him beyond all else. So if she had to turn against God or something like that, she would do that, because that's a samurai swears allegiance to serve their master. So that's above all else. She also she had wanted to actually, after some, maybe the dishonor of her father, I can't remember what, but there's plenty of chances where you kind of get the feeling that she wanted to take her own life as well. And she talks about not really having a problem with that. And so there was a lot of, it feels like with the Japanese Christianity of that time, they really stuck to their Japanese beliefs. And I feel like, I don't know that much about this, but I do know like nowadays Christianity is not very prevalent in Japan. I think it's like, less than maybe 1% of the population. Whereas like South Korea has a very large Christian population, or even China has, a lot more, even officially they have more official Christians, and then there's underground ones there. So I feel like maybe the Japanese culture just didn't, they didn't want to bend, I guess, or to change their ways to Christianity. But anyway, that kind of juxtaposition of Christianity with their kind of traditional Shinto and Buddhist, but also samurai beliefs, was very interesting. Also, with this book, one other thing that I found interesting, well, just like generally the things that learning about Japanese culture, and I know a historical fiction novel is probably not the best way maybe to learn about the culture, but I don't know. I take it as entertainment, but you can also learn from it. But just some of the things that you'll notice if you've ever been to Japan. I've only been to the airport, but several times. But like even at the airport, like everything is just super, super polite. Like the security guys, like I got called for that special security check years ago because I had a beard, I think. But and then the guy was patting me down, and every time he would touch me, first off, he wouldn't have found anything because he's barely touching me, and he's just like, sorry, 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 sorry. He must have said it, like 20 times as he was going up and down my body. That didn't sound good. But basically, with that, I do appreciate that part of Japanese culture, and it's also important here in Thailand. It's just like just being like generally polite and courteous. I feel like that's something Americans can definitely work on. But there's another thing where they talk about, I think it's like wa. It's pronounced, or it's not pronounced. It's spelled W-A. I just think of it as wa in my head. But that's kind of like the harmony. It can be like the harmony of a house. And so, for example, when you go to someone's house, when you're a guest, you don't want to disturb their wa. That's like the harmony of their house. The worst that you can do is to disturb their wa. So if you're like a husband and a wife, it would be very disgraceful to to get into an argument in someone else's house. I mean, I guess in any culture that would be a little bit of a bad thing, but here it's just emphasized. There's so many things where they even like a servant, when they're putting down a tray, and this is a little over the top too, but that they'll not want to have it make a clanking noise or anything that would disturb the peace or the harmony or the wa of it. And so part of me really appreciates that, because I do like to kind of keep harmony. I guess I'm not like a confrontational person, maybe to a fault. And I also don't like loud noises. Like here, I love Thailand, but there are just a lot of like really, really loud noises here. There'll be a party and it's just like concert level volume, but it's like outside and it just goes all night. Or right now it's election time. So these little trucks drive by and they just have loudspeakers and they're announcing like the candidates. Basically they're just like Bonum, Bonum, and then it'll like number one, because they all have numbers, and then it'll just talk for a while, but they're super loud. I hope that wasn't too loud. And so like personally, I like peace and quiet, so I do appreciate that in the Japanese culture as well. But anyway, yeah, the book in and of itself, it's very intriguing because it's like a political drama with these different powers. The six, the Council of Regents, they're all kind of vying to get to that power, and most of them believe if Toranaga takes power, that he's gonna keep that power for himself and do something bad to the heir. But the heir, Toranaga, has also been friendly to the heir, and so they know each other. Though the heir doesn't play a very prominent role in this story. So it kind of keeps moving on, and like I said, there's just constantly things happening, but it's not like convoluted or anything like that. It's easy to follow. I think Clavel did a really nice job of having an appropriate amount of characters, because it would have been very easy to kind of overburden the story with all these different viewpoints and all these different characters, but he doesn't do that. It's kept pretty simple, actually. It's not hard to follow at all, but it always stays, it's very captivating. It keeps you, yeah, it's a great book. I'll give my rankings at the end of this video, but I thought very highly of it. I think it's considered a kind of a classic of historical fiction, and I think it was like maybe came out in like 1976, perhaps. So it was before, like historical fiction now, I think takes itself a lot more serious as a genre. So maybe the history is a little more accurate. So he might have taken some liberties that maybe a current historical fiction writer would not. So keep that in mind, I guess. But yeah, highly entertaining. The second book that I read this month is Vagabond by Bernard Cornwell. This is book 2 of the Grail Quest, I guess 3 or 4 book series. There's originally 3, but then there's a 4th book kind of thrown on the end. So I don't know if it counts or not, because I think that's a standalone. I'm never sure about that, but I'm going to read all 4 of them anyway. And this is a continuation of the Grail Quest, which I think I just said. And so the first book in this series was The Archer's Tale. And this follows our protagonist, Thomas of Hookton. And kind of, I would say like the plot or the formula of this novel is very, very similar to the first book. And I liked the first book a lot. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. And this one, yeah, formulaically, if that's a word, follows kind of the same pattern And what I mean by that is it starts with a battle. Thomas pretty much starts with a battle, and Thomas, like, he has a knack for just finding himself in the right or wrong place at the right time for a battle. And then it kind of follows a journey from, one place to another, and then it ends with a battle as well. Now, Cornwell is, I guess he's very highly regarded for his battle scenes, and they are really good, especially if you're interested in kind of like military technology, because this series is focusing on like the English longbow, and that was a huge advantage to England at the time, because France and Scotland too were mainly using like crossbows, which were not as effective, and so the longbow was giving England a huge advantage in many of the battles, so they're able to win with fewer men and whatnot. But also in the battles, like kind of the strategy of battle and seeing what happens, and how they might start a battle with the longbowmen firing, and then it gets into, there's also knights on horses, but then there's also people fighting on foot, and a lot of times the villagers will just take whatever they have and jump in the battle, whether it's their axe for chopping wood, whatever they have, they'll jump in the battle as well. And so it goes through a lot of that in a very interesting and captivating way, though, because I actually don't I don't care much about battles or warfare, and I always found these really good. And so the story starts at the end of the last book. Thomas kind of is up in the air as to whether he wants to continue fighting in the 100 Years' War. That's when this takes place, or whether the beginning of the 100 Years' War, or whether he wants to go on this Grail quest, because his father, he finds out, was a priest who's murdered very early in the first book, actually had the Holy Grail, we're finding out, and Thomas's cousin in that family that he didn't know of actually originated in France. So Thomas didn't know all this, and his family, his relatives are in France, and they're a heretical sect in France. And in this one, so he's got his cousin who's one of the villains in the first book, and his cousin comes into play more prominently in this book, or just as prominently. So it starts with Thomas making his decision, and one of the nice things about this book actually is it has a little map in the front. And that's handy for me because I'm terrible at geography. And the thing I appreciate about it is just like how completely simple it is. Because I also get like a lot of history books that I read where they'll have like 4 or 5 different maps in different areas. It's just too much for me. So this kept it very simple. And so you see basically, the places in England and the places in Brittany and Normandy, and where the different battles take place. But the book starts with Thomas heading to northern England, to Durham, where he's going to meet a monk, or he's going to try to find a monk to learn more about the Grail. And turns out there's a battle there at the time, which seems to happen to Thomas a lot. And the Scottish under King David II were attacking in England in the north. And the reason they did this is because they thought all of England was down in France at that time. So King David II thought it was a perfect time to attack England. But England had thought of that, so they kept enough men behind that they were able to put up a good battle. And that's I think it's the Battle of Nexville's Crossing, I believe. I think I wrote it down, but I lost my page here. No, I lied about that. The battle is Neville Cross, I guess, is the battle. I don't know that much about the 100 Years' War, so these battles are all new to me. And so during that battle, I guess of interest is that at that time, if there was an important person, like especially the king or a knight or someone like that, you would try to capture them without killing them, so you could hold them for ransom. And so basically the English are able to take a lot of the Scottish ransom, including the king. But there's one guy who is the son of a Scottish lord, and because the English lord that captured him had been previously captured by the Scottish lord, they were basically kind of friends, or they respected each other. And so as a favor to the Scottish lord that he had captured, he allowed the son to go on the Grail quest with Thomas. And so they become friends, and he's a major player in the novel. I think his name was Robbie. And so they're continuing on the Grail quest, and it takes Thomas all over. So after this, it takes him to it takes him back to Normandy. Anyway, he basically goes to see his fiance's father, who is under siege. His home, or his area, is kind of under siege at the time. So Thomas goes to help him, and then so basically he's going back and forth in this novel a lot, and he ends up eventually he needs to go back to Brittany, where the first novel had the first battle in the first novel took place. And so he's back there, and there's kind of an epic battle at the end, which that battle I actually enjoyed a lot. That was I think that was more exciting than the first battle. And Thomas is left in this novel with another kind of decision he needs to make. He's kind of wishy-washy. And the next book is called Heretic. So that's kind of that leads me to believe it makes it possible that he makes a certain decision, but I don't want to spoil that at all. I will say I did not like this book as much as the first book. I still liked it. It just felt like a little less exciting than the first book. I didn't mind that it kind of copied the same formula as the first book, but just everything just felt kind of just I'd knock it down a notch for every part. So I still liked it a lot, and I'm still looking forward to continuing the series. The third book that I read, I didn't read this all this month. I'd been reading this for a while because, like I've said before, I'll generally read like an older classic slowly in the background of my other reading. So I finished Virgil's The Aeneid. So before reading this, I'd read Homer, so this is kind of can be a next step, but I definitely recommend reading both the Iliad and the Odyssey before reading this, because there's a reason why you read those first. And of course, Virgil comes along many years after Homer, and of course he's also a Roman. He's not Greek like Homer, and this is probably Homer obviously wasn't written originally, but this was written by Virgil about 700 years at least. They don't know the dates of Homer basically, but exactly, but probably at around 700 years after Homer. But the story still takes place in the Trojan Wars. So of course, Homer didn't live during the Trojan Wars either, of course. So he's writing about the past, and then Virgil's writing about the same past, basically. And so this book, I will say, it was kind of like a tale of two halves for me, because the first half of this book, I honestly liked it better than Homer, and so I was thinking like, oh man, Virgil this is great. I'll have a hot take that Virgil is better than Homer, but then the second half of this, unfortunately, really dragged for me. The first half reads a lot like the Odyssey. It feels like the Odyssey. And the second half feels more like the Iliad, but like a way less interesting version of the Iliad. And so if I was ranking this book, I would definitely give I will be ranking it, but I'd give the first half would have been a 10. I was like, this is amazing. And Virgil's great. This translation's good too. Robert Fitzgerald, he has a nice afterword at the end. But the second half, if I'm being honest, I would give it like a 6 or something. I did not like it, and so that'll be kind of reflective in my ranking of this book, which doesn't mean much anyway. But what I really liked about the the first half, well, in the Odyssey, right? As you know, Odysseus, he's on a journey to return home after the Trojan War, right? And it takes forever. And this book also takes place at the conclusion of the Trojan War, at least the majority of it does. And Aeneas is in a little different position. His home has been destroyed, and he needs to find a new home. And so that's what the story's about. And I guess one kind of interesting thing about this is Virgil connects it into present-day Rome. So, because there were what they'd call, I guess, the Latins or Latin tribes at the time that the Trojans, or at the time that Aeneid comes to, eventually makes it to Italy in this book. And so he's kind of writing it as a history of Rome, you know, the origin, not exactly the origins, but the origins of the Trojan people mixing with the Latins who are already there. So that's kind of cool. But basically, like the parts that I really enjoyed in the first part, there's a couple really kind of standout things for me. I wish I could. Okay. Well, of course, there's famously the sacking of Troy and the Trojan horse. You know, that famous tale that everyone's heard of. You don't get that in the Iliad or the Odyssey. That's in Virgil. So you'll want to read it for that alone. Very fascinating, of course. And it has the sacking of Rome following that. Not the sacking of Rome, sorry. The sacking of Troy. And then there's also an early part with a queen, book 4, the Passion of the Queen. And that's really fun because a goddess basically intervenes to make make the woman fall in love with Aeneas, and it doesn't end well for her. I remember hearing somewhere I saw like Saint Augustine had like before, when he was still a pagan, he really felt terrible for the queen. And I'm terrible at remembering names, but because she doesn't come to a good ending in this. But then after Augustine had become a Christian, he thought she was a pathetic character, and so it's kind of an interesting way to look at that. And then another thing that I really, really, really loved about this book is book 6, The World Below. So again, like I said, the first book, very similar to the Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes to the underworld, and he meets many of the victims, of the Greek victims in the Trojan War, many of the heroes. And so that's a really fun scene in the Odyssey. But here, what I found fascinating is Virgil, in a big way, he's a bridge to Dante. And of course, Dante is coming many, many, many years after this, around 1300. But of course, Virgil is a character. He's the guide through hell in the Divine Comedy, in the Inferno. And in this, so it's interesting to see the progression of the underworld, because in the Odyssey, in the Odyssey, sorry, they're in the underworld, it was just kind of there, it's just kind of a space. But the interesting thing about Virgil is he starts to have those levels of the underworld. And so, better people are in a better place, and then it gets worse kind of if you go to, deeper in perhaps. And of course, that was a huge influence on Dante. And so when you're reading the Inferno, as I am now, you'll really see all those stages. And the first time I read the Inferno, I didn't pick up on like that was coming from Virgil. But luckily, like since I'd seen that, then it was kind of interesting to see the progression of the underworld. Because this is interesting too in Dante. I'll talk about that book in another video. But he looks at Virgil as kind of a tragic hero in a way, because Virgil was born right before Christianity, before the life of Christ. And so he never had a chance to be Christian. And so in Dante's world, Virgil's not able to ascend to heaven, but he's Dante's hero. Dante's heavily influenced by him. And what I thought was interesting is because Virgil is so close to Christianity, and the ending of this book, the ending was interesting. It got, the battle took forever and it was boring, but the ending, Aeneas is given a choice. He has a choice whether to continue with the tradition of revenge, that you always see in, of course, in the Iliad, and hugely in the Odyssey. That's basically, Odysseus is trying to get home, but he's also trying to take revenge on all the suitors who have taken over his home. And at the end of this, Aeneas has a choice basically between revenge and forgiveness, and that flashes before his mind. And I don't remember seeing a lot of that in Homer. And so you can kind of see there was maybe a little bit of a progression in thought there. But I won't say what the conclusion is, but they haven't quite reached the let's say turning the other cheek. But so I'm not saying that you shouldn't read Virgil. For me personally, I did not like the second half, but it's a book I'll definitely reread, and I'll try to find a different version of it. Sometimes I like to get prose translations of some of the classics as well. But yeah, Robert Fitzgerald did a good job though. Like the as far as epic poetry goes, it's very good. It was more just kind of like the content of the second half that I didn't so much enjoy. But like I said, like maybe when I review these books that I'll show at the end, this would get the lowest ranking on my list. But if the devil was to come say, I'm going to erase all of these books from human history except for one, this is the book I would save, if that makes sense. So it's just the most important. It's foundational, and I appreciated it for all those things. But the entertainment value definitely went down in the second half. And I apologize because once again, this is taking me forever. I cannot do a book review in a short amount, no matter how hard I try. But the last book, this one, I'm not actually reviewing. It did happen to finish it at the end of the year, so I'll just briefly mention it. It's the Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, and I think this was originally published. The Life of the Saints was originally published by him in the 1750s. But it's a multi-volume set. And this is just kind of a condensed version. It's for every day in the year. So they'll have like one saint for every day of the year. So it's just like a quick thing you can look at if you want to read about one saint every day. But he does a really nice job. I like his writing a lot. So he'll go through and he'll talk about usually like one saint a day, but sometimes there's another one. And some saints that came along after this was published, there's like a appendix in the back where it'll refer you to that. But what I like is he'll talk about a saint. So for example, like if I go back to Christmas, this actually isn't a saint. It'll just be the Nativity of Christ or Christmas Day. But then the 26th you have Saint Stephen, the first martyr. If you like martyrs, this book is full of martyrs. But for example, on the 24th, they did Saint Delphilinus, I think. Delphilinus, I don't know how to pronounce his name. But anyway, at the end, Butler always gives his little reflection, almost always. And the reflections I always find quite nice. So the reflection on this day just kind of struck me. He said, "We may often think the austerities of the saints are beyond our strength. Let us then imitate the guard they all kept over their tongue. This is within the reach of all." Pretty cool, because a lot of times you read the saints and you're like, I can never do what they did. A lot of the austerities they took on, we wouldn't even want to attempt because we don't live in that time anymore. But if we could all just try to guard our tongues a little bit, present company included, the world would probably be a better place. So I'll end with that. Actually, I won't. I just want to say I will have another video coming out in the next day or two about my TBR for January. And I'll be talking a bit about Historathon 2026 in that one too. Just kind of my preliminary sketches of what I'm going to read in just in January for this. All right, so thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, man, I pity you. Goodbye.